Gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Infantryman's Guide. In this episode, we're going to talk about some basic considerations for an individual infantryman mitigating his thermal signature on the modern day battlefield. Now, thermals have progressed significantly over the years, but they've been around for a long time. I talked to my good buddy, Dr. Christopher Larson, who's a United States Army soldier back in the 80s, serving on the DMZ in Korea, and he talks about how he looked through, giant thermal optics back then to monitor that DMZ. Fast forward to 2003, me, as a young Marine, crossing the LOD into Iraq, and we had an optic like this, the PAS-13. This is both weapon-mounted and handheld. And, man-portable is, even though it's big, it's still man-portable, and this was something that we'd use at the squad level. It can be mounted to an M240 machine gun or a M249 squad automatic weapon. You fast forward to nowadays, hey, with the mass proliferation of civilian thermal optics on the market, this is a handheld thermal that can fit inside a magazine pouch, okay? So we went from big optics like this to little tiny things like this, and they pretty much have the same capability, or very close anyways. We also have weapon-mounted optics that are about the same size as a regular day optic and can easily be attached to a weapons Picatinny rail with quick detach mounts. So that is the current state of affairs, guys. Thermal technology is out there and more widely available than it's ever been before. Oh, and by the way, we also have aerial threats such as drones and other surveillance type aircraft that use thermals. So we as individual infantrymen need to know how to at least mitigate our thermal signature and operate environments where it makes it less likely for the enemy to be able to detect us. We have to assume that our enemy is either a near peer or peer threat and has this capability because it's so widely available out there, guys. You'd be an idiot to assume that the enemy does not have this type of capability. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it. Our first thing I want to talk about is individual clothing. So obviously with a combat utility uniform, it's touching your body, you're transferring heat to it, and it's going to be a different temperature than the surrounding area, and that's what makes us stand out. Certain clothing can help reduce that thermal signature, i.e. you guys see this video I'm putting out, you see that the Marines that are wearing their Gore-Tex parkas have a little bit less thermal signature than those that are wearing just their regular utilities. But in the end, guys, anything that's touching your body is ultimately going to transfer heat and probably be a different temperature than your surrounding, making you more observable. So there's also companies out there that have thermal reducing suits and cloaks and things of that nature. And obviously all that stuff's good and well if you can get your hands on it, but you also have to take into consideration, is this going to hamper my mobility? Kind of like with a sniper's ghillie suit. Obviously the ghillie suit is good for defeating the old Mark I eyeball, but it's not really practical for an individual infantryman. Same might be true for wearing some of those thermal defeating cloaks. So what is the number one thing that we can do as infantrymen to mitigate enemy detection of us via thermal? Well, that's just simply using our environment to our advantage, guys. Making sure that we have sufficient concealment from the enemy. We're using our microterrain. I'm standing in a trench right now. So if I'm moving through this trench and the enemy's position's up there looking that way, right, they're not going to see me because I'm in this trench down in the defilade from his observation. Same is true with if we have sufficient concealment. If there's a lot of vegetation between us and them, that thermal optic that they have is not Superman power vision, right? It doesn't look through trees. If the vegetation is thick enough, they're not looking through it and they're not going to be able to see us. So having sufficient vegetation between us and the enemy is going to aid us. Same is true with overhead cover, right? Tree canopy. So if they have a drone up in the air or enemy aerial observation from helicopters or loitering drones of any type of sort, if it's looking down and we have sufficient overhead cover, it's not going to be able to see through that to see us. You guys always see video of helicopters with FLIR flying over heavily vegetated areas. There's big game down there. There's bears and deer and hogs and shit like that down there. But yet you never see that stuff in that vision when they're flying over, because they usually have sufficient heavy vegetation overhead cover that it's not penetrating through that to see what's on the ground. So as individual infantrymen, we have to keep that in mind, right? If we have sufficient vegetation overhead cover, they're not going to be able to see us from aerial observation. If we have sufficient vegetation between us and the enemy, they're not going to be able to see us through ground observation, as well as if we utilize proper microterrain and defilade, the enemy's not going to be able to see us there. So that's the things that we need to take in consideration, whether we're moving enclosing with the enemy, or if we're setting up a position to observe the enemy from, or sitting in the defense or things like that, making sure that we have good concealment. All right, next let's talk about some materials to help camouflage our position. So whether we're sitting in the defense or in something like an LPOP, how can we best mitigate our thermal signature from both the ground level as well as in the air level against something like a UAV? We have to keep in mind, guys, most detection is still going to be from the old Mark I eyeball. So whatever you're using still needs to be able to camouflage itself in normal fashion. Okay, so this is the old style cami netting. You guys can see it's just a regular net, and then you have the cami netting material attached to it. This is great for normal detection and vision. However, it's not going to do us much good for thermal. Thermal's going to see right through that. What's better? Hey, modern day old can style cami netting. So on one side you have the cami netting just like the original older model cami netting, but on the flip side you're going to have this mesh material. This mesh material is going to help break up that thermal signature, and you're not going to be able to be detected as easily. Okay, so this is a good alternative. This one's obviously a desert net, and this one's a woodland net. But the key thing to keep in mind, guys, is that this mesh material is going to help break up that thermal signature very well. But with that said, you need to have standoff, right? You can't just throw this over your body and expect it to be like a thermal cloak. It doesn't work that way. If this is touching your body, your heat's going to transfer over to it. So the key is to have some standoff with this netting. Same is true if you're using a regular USGI style poncho. Okay, as long as you have some standoff, that thermal is going to have a tough time picking you up. Unless this is directly touching your body or it's close to your body to where your body heat is transferring to it, just having some standoff with a regular USGI poncho is going to give you some thermal reducing properties. Now the problem with that is if you just string up a poncho, you're going to have this perfect square around you, right? So it's no different from stringing up a poncho and seeing it visually, detecting it visually with your Mark I eyeball, and looking through a thermal. Okay, if you just have this strung up, you're going to see a perfect square. So the key is break up the outline. Break that outline up. So a combination of your poncho as well as cami netting will really go a long way in helping defeat that thermal signature. Other cami netting like this is a little bit lighter weight cami netting, but it's it's more solid. It's still see-through, so it's still gonna give away thermal signature, but you're gonna have some of that 3D property to help break up that that signature. So if somebody's looking at it through some sort of thermal optic, they're just not gonna see some perfect rectangular square and know right away that that's gonna be an enemy position. Something else that a lot of people use, hey, a survival blanket, Mylar style survival blanket. You guys can see this one right here. Just opened it up, but it's got OD on one side, and then it's got that reflective, heat reflecting properties the other side. Obviously, the danger with this is two things. One, it's really noisy, and then two, you have this bright, shiny, silver reflective material, which isn't a great idea for a tactical environment in general. But what can you do? You can couple this, right? Use this in conjunction with this, right? Put this on the inside. You got the shiny reflective side facing inside your position, the OD side facing out, your 3D cami netting on top of this, and there you go. That coupled together is going to help reduce your thermal signature and make you less detectable by the enemy. Well, that's it, gentlemen. That completes this episode of Infantryman's Guide over basic principles for mitigating an individual infantryman's thermal signature. If you guys are liking what you're seeing, don't forget to check out my channel, subscribe. We're doing several videos over infantry-related topics, and I plan to do some more in the future. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment.